Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
It's a great pleasure and privilege to have a chance to talk to Wynne Godley. Wynne, when and where were you born?
I was born in Paddington. We had, that was before we became, or before we recovered our Irish heritage. And my parents lived in Sussex at that time.
When was this?
I was born in 1926. And then what happened was that, well, I really should go back a bit.
Yes, well, I was going to ask you about your grandparents.
Yes, and my great-grandparents.
And great-grandparents.
Because it's all rather a mystery to me, because my great-great-grandfather married an heiress, which was a great deal of land in a very poor part of Ireland. And he must have been a man of great imagination, because he made a very, very wonderful domain. I mean, he had 4,000 or 5,000 acres of land, poor land, which was let out. But he made a very beautiful, wondrously beautiful place, which planted up beech and oak woods overlooking lakes, and a modest mansion house which looked over the lakes.
This was at Kilbracken.
Killigar is the name of the house.
Yeah.
It's next to the townland of Kilbracken.
This is Killigar.
Killigar.
In what date? It looks a bit...
1900.
Ah, it's already looking a little bit...
1892.
Hmm.
And then he had a lot of children, of whom the most distinguished was, he was called John Robert Godley, and he ailed, but he went nevertheless in 1848, he founded the province of Christchurch in New Zealand, and he went there, sailed there in 1948-9, and founded the province, and then came back and was then permanent secretary of the War Office. And Gladstone admired him very much, called him, I think I got my Greek correct, Anax Andron, a king among men. And would certainly have been in the cabinet if he lived. But he was ill all that time. All that time he was ill. And my grandfather, in his reminiscences, describes that how at the age of 12 he went into his room and to his astonishment his father told him he was going to die. And he died that day. And he had no idea that this was going to happen. And then, after very distinguished, but not at the top level, as it were. So then my grandfather, Arthur Godley, became very close to Gladstone, and was his second private secretary in 1872, and actually lived in 10 Downing Street. And then he was again his principal private secretary in 1884. And immediately after that he became permanent secretary of India, which he was, I think, for 26 years. A man of extraordinary ability and knowledge and scholarship. And
did he live in India much of that time?
He didn't even go to India all his life. extraordinary.
Isn't it?
He didn't think it necessary and went to considerable lengths as far as I could make out not to go. But he was considered to be very successful, and he kept up all his learning and his classical scholarship, and eventually became interested. He gave up all his literary interests in favour of Dante. I've got all his books on Dante there. So anyway, he lived to be quite an age. You see, I've got a picture here of him with me,
Is that's the two of you, is it?
the both of us.
I'll just see if I can zoom in on it. There it is, just above your head. You've got a little boat with you, is that right?
I've got the little boat with me, but I've also got it up there, the ferry boat, on the top of my...
Lovely. The yacht, which appears in the portrait with the Wynne's grandfather.
Anyway, my grandfather was the... See, he's there, I think he's about 85, about 1 year before he died. With me about 5. And he's been the inspiration of my life, the positive inspiration. He had such authority, and I don't like to use the word good with children, but he had a gift with children whom he could entertain for an endless length of time. And at treats, he took me, but he's very rich now. But for instance, he would get his chauffeur, we'd go to the nearest station, we'd take a train, the chauffeur would be waiting at the other end to pick us up. So you can see how I would have loved him. And I did love him, and I still love him. And I think about him more and more and more.
What about your grandmother?
My grandmother died in 1920, and very little has been handed down about her. She was married. Her maiden name is James. And in fact, the only story I know about her is that she asked some people to dinner and they didn't turn up. And when she came back into the dining room where everybody was sitting and eating, she said, "How horrid you all look eating my hot ham." That's the only thing that I've ever heard that she said.
That was strange. Your grandfather became Lord...
That's right, Lord Kilbracton, and he was honoured in his retirement in about 1911 or 12. Not for buying his peerage, but for sterling work at the India Office and in other civil service jobs that he had. Now, what is interesting to me, and I've never quite fathomed it, was that he had 2 first cousins. I mean, he had many first cousins, but 2 of them became very distinguished. One was somebody called Alfred Dennis, A.G. Godley, who was the public orator at Oxford, a distinguished classical scholar, known mainly now for his comic verse. He wrote a very famous poem called "What is it that roareth thus? Can it be a motor bus? Yes, the smell and hideous hum indicat motorem bum." And so he goes through all the cases, ending up with "Domine defende nos, contra hos motoris bos." A lot of them, they're very funny poems. And I've got his relations. He introduced Richard Strauss for a doctorship, with references to Electra and Salome. And another cousin who was a general, who commanded the Anzacs. No, he wasn't popular as a general. Both at Gallipoli and in Passchendaele. And nearly 4,000 people killed in a single day in Passchendaele under his command. But he was a very charming man, very handsome man. But what is strange to me is that this sort of clutch of, not as it were spectacular, but nevertheless very distinguished men, came out of this sort of boggy, rushy place in the in the poorest part of Ireland.
But they presumably came out and then went to expensive English boarding schools.
Yes, they all did. I think they all did. My grandfather, there was some mix-up to do. I don't know what the details are. I've never been able to find out. But my grandfather, sold all the land, all the agricultural land.
In Ireland?
In Ireland, in the 90s. I think there was a scheme to buy out the present, from the landowners. And they just preserved what's called the domain, and kept it up. But my grandfather didn't like the place for some reason I've never been able to discover, and never went there after his early childhood. So then, well, I might just continue that. This very, very wonderfully beautiful place was let to a cousin of my grandfather's until 1936. Uncle Archie, we used to call him, he died in about 1910. But he had a daughter who lived there. And then, I'm sorry to say, there was a very abrupt descent into hell, because my father was a very severe alcoholic. And he fell in love with somebody who wasn't my mother. So my parents were separated about the time I was born. I never really saw them together. But they had this nice house in Sussex, which was adjoined the property of my grandfather. So I saw a great deal of him through my very early childhood. But through the first 6 or 7 years of my life, there was great enmity between my parents. And of course I couldn't detect drunkenness as a young child. I couldn't see what was happening. But nevertheless, there's something so many people have suffered from, having drunken parents, that I almost forbear to mention it. But the trauma...
You say parents.
Oh yes, no, my mother wasn't a drunkard.
Yeah.
No, my mother was not. She was fey. I mean, she wrote children's poems, and had, but no, she was not. But she was very deeply affected by the split, and they did hate one another. And I thought, God, they all kept correspondence in those days. There were pages and pages of solicitors' letters and accusing letters. Oh, that's just terrible. Through a period of at least 10 years.
What was your father's occupation?
He was a lawyer, and his principal occupation. He was a bit of a coward, I now think. I mean, he didn't really like practicing at the bar, but he was a learned man. I mean, he was well, that's what he was. He was thoroughly well informed, and had remembered his Latin and Greek right through to the end of his life, and a man of great personal charm. But then he had a sort of secret love affair. It started in about 1930, and My home was not really populated, although I had two siblings who were older than me.
Brothers or?
I had one brother and one sister, and I also had a half-sister who was what should I call her? She was mentally ill. But the home was not populated. There weren't children in it, and there weren't friends. So I spent a lot of time, lonely time, not being properly educated. I mean, 4, 5, 6. And I was ill. I had a bad year. And when I was 7, my father had me made us all wards of court, and I went to see a judge in Chambers, and he said I was fit to go to school. So when I was just 7 years old, and never having dressed myself, literally, I had not ever dressed myself. I didn't know how to dress.
Who had dressed you?
I had a governess.
Oh, right.
Who did everything for me. And I went through the Chamber of Horrors at a British prep school.
Which one was that?
Well, it was one called Ashdown House, which was not far away.
In Sussex?
In Sussex.
Yeah, the Ashdown Forest.
That's right, on the Ashdown Forest. I went to a kind of gaudy lunch there recently, and it had multiplied by 5. It had a lot of very pretty matrons. I couldn't help noticing.
Which you didn't have in your day, as you remember.
Had very fierce people. There was a terrifying man called Mr. Bather.
Bather?
Bather. B-A-T. You know, I talked about these things, but he was, his memories. We were going on to the football, to play football, and he was wearing, remember those shorts that people, professionals, baggy, very baggy white shorts, and great big boots. And he shouted out, "Hurry up!" And then one of the children said, not having heard him obviously, "There's no hurry." And so, I've forgotten what his name was, I can usually remember. He said, "Lord, bend over." And he ran at him with his shorts flapping, and so gave him a colossal kick with his boots. And you could tell it more or less as a funny story, but it's very frightening for a young child to see such a thing. And then books are full of such incidents. Anyway, yes.
How long were you at this school?
Well, I was ill, and eventually I had an operation. I was at school for about 1.5 years. And then I went to a real snob school called Sandroyd, which was well known for, there were a lot of sort of famous business names, which of course I didn't realise at the time. Berkeley and Sneyd and Pyman. And
where was the school?
that was in Surrey, Cobham. And there were 3 little Karageorgevich princes who were nice. And they were attractive tribe. But there were real, although it was a rather formidable place with an awful lot of beating.
Were you beaten?
Yes, and it hurt. School of headmaster.
But the teaching was reasonable.
Well, the teaching was excellent. I mean, it was in a very important way I do owe my education, because although he was a horror, he had saving graces, headmaster, because he had a sense of humour. There was a famous occasion on which a boy fainted, and he tried to pick him up by pulling at the leg of another master. Instead of pulling at the boy's foot, he pulled at the leg of another master who was trying to pick him up. And the whole situation seemed to be so absurd. He became in chapel this one. He began to laugh. I couldn't, uncontrollably. But of the masters who was there was a man called John Graves, who taught Latin, and who was the brother of Robert Graves. And there was a very ambitious maths master.
And Graves was good, was he, as a Latin master?
Well, I didn't too much. I got to like him later on. He had me thrashed. Because, and that was quite a revealing stuff. He said, "Godley, why are you yawning?" And I gave him, I said, "Because I was feeling bored, sir." We're going to see the headmaster before lunch. Yeah. And there was another good Latin master. They were really well-educated people.
And the maths master, you said, was?
Yeah, very, very good. I mean, in his ambition for the pupils. And he forced me to make an effort. So there's a certain kind of mathematical or arithmetical manipulation became easy to me and saw me through.
Were you beginning to enjoy intellectual things by this time, or?
Only thing which I really enjoyed was the English. So I learnt a lot of poetry by heart. And again, it's rather symptomatic, because my father said to me, "You can have, I give you £5. That equals £100. If you learn the whole of the Ancient Mariner by Christmas."
Did you?
I got up to 130 verse 135, and then headmaster heard of this. He said, "This has got to stop." Never gave any explanation, but it wasn't
coordinated.
Sort of conventional. And I still know it. I mean, jolly nearly.
Were you good at other things by this time?
I
Games
won
or
the golf championship.
At that school?
Yes.
Good heavens.
They had a golf course. And I also did a hole-in-one. And I won the chess championship. But I never was any good at the regular games. I wanted to be, but I had no gift.
So then you went on at the age of what, 12, 13?
I went at 13. I went to rugby, which I still think was a good school. I was beginning to get very keen on music, and I had two people in my life from about that time, from about 1939, 40, who were enormously influential in my life. One was the music master at rugby, who was called Kenneth Stubbs. He was a bachelor, and he was a piano teacher of genius. And I know he was a friend of Donald Tovey. Is that a name?
Yes, I've heard the name.
He's a very, very distinguished musicologist. And I was just thinking, during the time I was at rugby, he trained up, I think there were 6 during the 3 years I was there, 6 boys who played movements, difficult movements from difficult concertos. Now, Beethoven 4, Rachmaninoff 2, Grieg, César Franck, Brahms 2, all played to a high standard with a good orchestra. Anyway, he was a man of very great personal charm, who welcomed boys into his house. So I avoided the rigours of rugby life. Not that they were severe, but I spent a great deal of time in his house.
You were learning the clarinet?
Only oboe.
Oboe.
The teaching wasn't very good, but again I played a terrible lot of music, even at rugby. Got through a lot of music. And the second musical influence was William Glock. Heard of William Glock? Sounds
familiar.
Yes. Well, he was an extraordinary man. His only real integrity was with regard to music. He had flypaper memory like Frank Kermode. If you said a list of numbers, £7, 12 and sixpence, £18, he just added up in his mind. He was a very, very fine pianist. He was a pupil of Schnabel. And well, as I now see it, he was a bit of a rogue, because he was a sponger in the first part of his life. And
is he now dead?
Yes, he is dead.
I don't want any libel suits.
No, well, I've got to be a bit careful because I loved him. You know, these somewhat psychopathological people who come into families and disrupt them are very, very deeply loved. He came on the scene as, well, as I now know, as my mother's lover. But he used to stay with us in London, and I adored him. And then I learnt a terrible lot of music from hearing him play.
What age was this?
Starting at about 12. So my time at rugby was, in a sense, I feel that I was never really there, because I was all the time playing my oboe, and later on the piano a little bit. I started much too late. Started everything too late, musically. But I acquired a certain sort of schoolboy. All the teaching of music was very much, apart from this man himself, was very much inferior to what it is now. So I didn't learn my scales and arpeggios properly.
Were there any academic subjects which you were
No.
getting interested in?
Not really. I had a good classics master, and I learned a lot of English from him. He was a great reader. But my knowledge of classics began to slip and slip. And I just got into, I could do a prose good enough to get into Oxford, but I wasn't at all interested in it. I was only really interested in music. The time that I left rugby, my only serious interest was music, and playing, above all playing music.
Is that what you went to read at Oxford?
No, I did modern greats at Oxford. And then I had an absolutely marvellous time. I started all over again.
We've missed the war. The war had no real influence.
Oh yes, that's advisedly, because although my brother was in the Navy as a fleet air arm, I was a bit anxious about him. He flew swordfish on convoys to America and Russia. But somehow we got through the war. The war began, I was born on the 2nd of September, which was the day they marched into Poland. And so it began absolutely just at the beginning of my time, just before I went to rugby. And I didn't encounter the war as a serious phenomenon at all. Not at all. I didn't read the newspapers. I mean, it's wrong and weak and narrow-minded. But I didn't. And nobody did. Nobody at school did. And I was allowed to go with my father to Ireland during the holidays, where there were mountains of butter and eggs and meat and no blackout. So
It didn't affect you
I
too much.
bypassed the war, I'm ashamed to say. I didn't follow it properly.
And you
And
went
I'm
to
ashamed of that.
you went to Oxford more or less just after the war then.
No, it was still just about in progress. I went at the end of 1943.
Did you?
It was only a very short time at Rugby, yes. 43, and I was there at Oxford for 3.5 years, back in.
And why was Oxford so wonderful?
Well, I had very lovely rooms in New College. I had my mother's Steinway grant. It was luxury beyond anything you could imagine. And I had the most wonderful teachers. And wonderful senior common room, who were very indulgent to me. I was spoiled. I mean, to begin with, I was taught by a man who very likely you wouldn't have heard of, called Philip Andrews, P.W.S. Andrews, who taught me. He was, again, very ambitious for his pupils, and had what I can now see to be heterodox ideas which became deeply embedded in my mind at that time. I mean, he taught me the regular things, but he had this very lively interest in particularly the manufacturing industry and how it worked, which he taught me, and which were tremendously influential, subconsciously to me, throughout the whole of my life. Well, I mean, with regard to economics. And I didn't realise that at all. And then as time went on, of course there was a very lively musical life going on with Dr. Armstrong, Thomas Armstrong, who was the organist at Christchurch. And he was in charge of the orchestra there, Oxford Orchestral Society. And the amount of music we got through, B minor Mass, the St. Matthew Passion, Brahms Third. I mean, just huge repertoires in Schubert Symphony, great symphony, Schubert Unfinished. I mean, no end to the wonderful things we played at a reasonable standard.
This is in the Oxford Orchestral.
Oh, it was called the Oxford Orchestral Society, but I had a great friend who was also a known physicist called Christopher Lonkett Higgins.
Oh, very famous, yes. Yeah.
He's a very brilliant musician.
Hmm.
I don't know if you do that.
I think I did, yes.
And anyway, he ran his own orchestra,
Hmm.
and I used to play in that.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the biggest event, if you like, of my life in many different ways was Isaiah Berlin, who taught me for a year and a half before I took schools. I specialized in Kant and logic, not economics.
You could have done economics, but you didn't. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, I wasn't really truly interested in economics, or wasn't interested in industry. I was quite interested in...
So it sounds as if Modern Greats was really a sort of precursor to PPE. Is that
It
right?
was PPE. It was also called PPE.
Was it? Oh,
yes.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
But my passion was philosophy through Isaiah.
Tell me something about him, your memories of him.
Well,
He talked very fast, I remember.
he talked very fast. See, almost my first impression of him was that he was slightly silly. Because he had none of that grandness that came to him in later life. None of it at all. I thought of him as being, you know, a funny man, above which I mean a wit, a man in whose company you laughed. And there was, however, one, I mean, I've written about this actually in a piece I wrote about part of my life, but I think it's quite a good story, both about me and about him, that he, see, I've always found it difficult to confront people. And so my natural desire when he was teaching me was to somehow work out what it was that he was thinking and then produce what he wanted. So I'd read my essay on logic, whatever it was, and he'd comment on it. And then I would try to work out from his comments what his view about the subject was. Then I'd reproduce this the next day. And then he'd use his chopper on my revised piece. And then I tried to do the same thing again. Well, now, this must be what he really thinks. Getting myself into a worse and worse model. And model. Anyway, then, after this had gone on for about 4 times, and I was reading it, there's a 4th version of this, he suddenly burst out laughing. I mean, really laughing. And said, how gloriously artificial was how it. I was rather mortified. But of course he was absolutely right. And, you know, because by this questionnaire method and tearing me to pieces, he forced me to make a mental effort that I'd never in my life made before. And really almost to that moment, I owe all the real mental training that I ever had.
Did he stop this procedure of backwards and forwards after that or not?
Well, he gradually took me more seriously. I mean, the whole thing became more serious. But I had a relationship with him apart from teaching him. And we used to go to the cinema together in London.
Was this while you were an undergraduate?
No, that actually was after. I didn't have an intimate relationship with him until I left. But there were a lot of other very amusing people there. I mean, notably Lord David Cecil, who was an extraordinarily entertaining man. And he used to invite me to dinner at High Table, which we aren't allowed to do in Cambridge. And
was he at New College?
Yes. And there were other people. So it was like being in heaven, really.
There was much less of a gap between the dons and the undergraduates.
Much less. There was intimacy. And Agnes Headlam Morley, she taught me modern history and was a good friend.
Did you go to Isaiah's lectures?
Yes.
They were phenomenal, weren't they?
Well, and the ones I went to were slow.
Were they?
Yes. I mean, you could write them down.
I went towards the end and you just couldn't write anything. It was just...
No, I think when he was doing philosophy, he spelt it all out.
Was he interested in liberty at that time?
He didn't talk to me about it. We talked about philosophy, we gossiped.
Did he talk about his background, his East European background?
Well, just very occasionally. But he didn't feature it. It was very light-hearted. He talked, I mean, I was going to say, I do say, he talked a lot of nonsense. I mean, he thought certain words were funny, like wombat. He thought that was a funny word. No. we said silly things to one another, you know. And his persona did change when he became so immensely influential. Because I don't know, much later on I had quite a different life with him at Covent Garden.
So how did you get on in the final examination?
I got a first.
You did?
Yeah, I did. I can't think how, but I did.
And were there any friends of your own generation who you remained in touch with or were influential at that time?
No.
You mentioned Longinette Higgins.
Longinette Higgins.
Yeah.
He just died the other day. I kept up with him while I was in Paris. I went to Paris for 3 years immediately after Oxford. I kept up with him for a time, but for various reasons we didn't keep up my very intimate relationship. The other very close friend that I had was somebody you very likely wouldn't have heard of, called Hugh Leach. He was a medieval historian and had a tremendous success at Bletchley, at decoding things. He was a man of extraordinary knowledge for his age, or for any age.
So he'd come back from Bletchley?
Yes. And he got a first, needless to say.
Why did you go to Paris after?
But well, this is a big story. You see, I got my first when I was only 20 then. Well,
Were you?
3.5 years.
So you'd gone up at 16? Or
Just not. Just 17. I thought I had no ambition. And I thought I would go and study music. I had a stupid, completely misconceived idea that I would be able to learn to play the oboe well enough to earn my living by it, and that I would still have time to write novels or be a literary man, have two careers. And to some extent, I spent 3 years in Paris. I was taught by the professor at the Conservatoire, whom I had every reason to suppose was a very good teacher, but whom I now think was a very bad teacher. But that was my principal activity then, almost all that I did by way of work, all that I did by way of work, was learnt to play the oboe. I lived for the first year, I suppose I had a rather unique experience. I lived in a family, the father was a director of the French railways. So it was a sort of middle class, rather well-to-do. They had 10 children, all of them, except 2, grown up. A huge flat in the 6th arrondissement. And I had a lot of friends in the British Embassy too. Met a lot of people. And then it had a sort of high social aspect to it. Nancy Mitford.
Oh yes.
And
you met her?
I knew her quite well.
And what was she like?
I never really liked her.
You didn't like her?
Not really.
No. Was she as snobby as she?
Oh, absolutely. Worse.
Did you meet the whole clan of Mitfords?
No, I didn't know the other Mitfords. She was married to a man called Peter Rodd, who is known of course as Prod, who was a dull man, definitely a leaden man. She lived a smart life in the Rue Monsieur, And through her I did meet the Duff Coopers.
Mm.
And then Diana Cooper became a close friend. I mean, I hate to say took me up, but I spent a lot of time alone with her.
Mm.
We went
She was meant to be very beautiful, wasn't
she? She was very beautiful. She kept her beauty.
Mm.
But it was her wit that she was very, very funny and good company. And she'd known my father and had amusing stories to tell about him. What was the name of that? They had a...
Did you say she's now my father?
No,
That's my deafness, probably.
I just said she told me about her life and high flirtation with my father.
Ah, right.
About
Yep.
30 years previously.
Yep.
When they used to go up some tower in one of the castles they lived in and have kissing sessions. What she called great big gluers. Proper kisses. So I don't feel I distinguished myself in those rather elevated levels, but I did go there and I did watch. I experienced it all. And Duff Cooper, he was a formidable man. He had an extraordinary knowledge of poetry by heart and rather peppery. He was a man who lost his bait. He lost his bait rather easily. They lived somewhat separately.
Was he an ambassador?
Yes,
that's right.
He was ambassador to France.
That's right.
But not when I...
And he wrote about Talleyrand, what was it?
He did.
Yeah.
And he wrote about King David, that's right. Well, he was...
So you had a good time in Paris, you enjoyed it?
Fantastic.
It was after the war, but I suppose it's beginning to recover a bit.
Well, you see, it was so cheap and so run down. And I got a scholarship. Alexander Korda gave me a scholarship to live and enough money to live there for 2 years. And then I changed my lodgings. The bad part of that was that I didn't get any, well, I was studying music. I didn't get any music. I'd formed the opinion, which I've never quite lost, that the French don't really like it.
Music?
Yeah. And so above all, not French musicians.
They don't like French musicians?
They don't, no, French musicians don't like music.
Oh, right.
Because they used to play such rubbish. I once went into the professor's room. I happened to be carrying a score of a Beethoven quartet. And he said, "Qu'est-ce que vous faites avec cette petite musique-là?" He didn't like me liking Beethoven. He was the first oboe in the Paris Opera, of course.
You used to go to music, presumably, at the opera and so on?
I didn't.
You didn't?
No. I learnt music. But what I did do, though, my musical friends were all Americans. Because I'd been brought up to have a considerable degree of contempt for all Americans. And to my astonishment, there was a clutch of American music students who were absolutely brilliant. Composers, pianists, performers, and in fact the first public concert, there was a wonderful girl there, Sarah Cunningham, she'd written a piece for violin and oboe and piano. And I played it with her in I think it was in the Salle Pleyel, anyway, one of the big concert venues in Paris. I've never been so frightened in my life. But it went quite well. But all my playing experience was with these American experiences. I hardly played in an orchestra single. If ever I did play in an orchestra, it was in what the conservatoire called classe de chef d'orchestre. In other words, it was a conducting class. So we've got a piece which is notoriously difficult to conduct, like the beginning of the last movement of the Third Symphony, which is very difficult to do. You have to sit there and play this bloody piece. Well, 15 aspiring conducting students came. So that was almost all the playing we got in an orchestra. And then, anyway...
what happened at the end of Paris? You went...
Well, I had the most extraordinary luck. I can't imagine how it happened. I mean, does this interest you?
It does. Period I wasn't very old in, and it's fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating, yes. Go on. What happened to you?
Well, I did something which is scarcely credible. I had to buy reeds for my oboe, and I went to see the man who was known to be the expert. I mean, all proper oboe players make their own reeds, but I couldn't do it. Anyway, I went to buy this, and he said to me that he'd been asked to play second oboe in an orchestra that was well known at the time, called the New London Orchestra, but he couldn't do it. And would I like to go in his place? Well, I had no orchestral experience. What was his name? I remember all these things. Alex Sherman, he was called, the conductor. Quite a well-known orchestra. I knew about it, and about him. And I rang up his brother, who was the fixer, and said, I've been asked to play this, but I won't do it unless Alex Sherman hears me and gives me an audition. And he said, okay, and I went to his house, and he asked the conductor, and I had the parts, I played the parts, and he liked me, and he engaged me, and I played it. Now, the piece we played was actually, which was the great C minor concerto of Mozart. It had incredibly difficult wind parts, in the slow movement in particular. And I'd learnt them. I mean, I could technically play them, but terribly difficult to put it together. And I went along to the rehearsal just as I was going to my execution. And I played them. I played these parts. They went all right. Played in the concert. And it went all right. I mean, I was terribly shaken by the whole experience. To my astonishment, the fixer, who was also called Sherman, rang me up and fixed me up for 4 more concerts. And as a result of this absolutely insane burst of honesty, I mean, quixotic to a degree that you can, instead of gobbling it up, to demand that I should be auditioned, I then became the official second oboe of that orchestra. And I found myself playing all over London and difficult parts. The second concert had the entry of the Queen of Sheba, which has quite spectacular parts for the two oboes. So that's how I got into it. And I stayed in there. And I could match, I could rise to that. I also got a job in a ballet orchestra. I've played 4 acts of Swan Lake, and of the Sleeping Beauty, and of the other.
Nutcracker and so on.
Well, the big one with the willies and. Very, very amusing pieces to play. Once you think you're sick of them, but all full of jam. And then I got a job. Then I was principal in the BBC Welsh Orchestra and played the solo parts for a year, 1951. 5 concerts, short concerts. Remember, there's 5 live broadcasts a week. And then I went back to it was then called they were all the same people, Boyd Neal Orchestra. And we went on a tour of the United States and Canada. But all this time I was getting ill through nerves, performance, terrified, always. And I remember thinking, I can't continue with this. Well, you know, I played in the B minor mass with Enesco conducting and Paul Zacher was a great, famous conductor. I just had to give it up. Not because there was no loss to the profession, but I was so terrified. Through all that very happy time of being with my of starting being in Paris and all that. There was a counterpart which was counterpoint, which was very deeply distressing because my father disintegrated mentally with drink. He kept his authority in a way, but I mean there was something out, and I never could confront him with it. I could never talk to him about it. And he became deeply estranged from his second wife, whom I was extremely fond of. And then she shot herself with a shotgun. That would have been just at the beginning of my second year in Paris. And he died in 1950, just about the time I was coming back from Paris. He just went to a severe decline. But you can imagine from that little story that there were moments of very serious degradation, and very conspicuous, because he was the grandee in the Irish countryside. So it was all very visible.
He was living at
Killigrew. Well, you see, he got the... Having been a lawyer, having been a counsellor, you know, he then became... He was a very skilled draftsman, and he became the what's called counsel to the Lord Chairman. Or no, it's called counsel, parliamentary counsel to the Treasury. So he used to draft bills, and he drafted what's the name of the man who got deadlocked, wholly deadlocked.
Oh, A.P. Herbert.
A.P. Herbert. He drafted A.P. Herbert's bill.
On divorce.
And that's what and then he became, got an official, although he was a peer, he got an official job in the House of Lords, and got the sack for making an arse of himself in the peer's dining room, which he didn't like. But he didn't really believe that anybody ever noticed it. It was the first thing he noticed, who knew. So that was all...
The background to Paris, yes.
Terrible trauma. I mean, I mean, a child, I would say, at least I certainly couldn't distance myself from what was going on.
What is strange in a way is that you've got to the point in your life when you've decided you weren't going to be an oboist, a professional oboist, and we're going to find out how quickly you transferred to what seems to the general public to be about the opposite, most far. I remember many years ago Ernest Gellner said, "Did you know Wynne used to be an oboist?" I said, "No, it couldn't be. I mean, economists are people with no soul and no aesthetics." So there seems nothing in the preparation apart from the fact that you did greats.
P.W.S. Andrews, he was the man.
Yes. But how was it that you now...
Well, I had a very difficult time. I mean, it was a very, very tough time. And stayed tough for a long time. Because at the age, how old was I? In 19... Last concert I played in was in 1952. Right at the end of the year.
About 26. You were about 26.
And then I came back, and then I fell in love with my wife, which is very soon after coming back.
This is your current wife?
Kitty, I've
Kitty.
only had one, yes.
Tell us just about Kitty, because of course she's from a very interesting
Kitty was
family.
then married to Lucien Freud, but separated. But not formally separated, but she was not. She had 2 little children, and I met her at a party, as you might in London. Party given by Freddie Eyre. And so that was a big sort of element of that period, as you can imagine. And I spent a lot of that year really having a good time. We went to Ireland, we went to France. And I tried to write my novel, which was a terrible failure. I mean, I never tried to get it published, but I tried very hard. And then eventually I realized that I had got to get a job.
You didn't mention her father.
Oh no, her father was very genial.
And his name?
Jacob Epstein.
Yes.
He was very, Epstein was, I don't know what impression you get of him, but he was a very genial man in ordinary company. He was very merry. Had flashing blue eyes. And he made that bust of me in, I think, 5 sittings.
This is a bust that, what happened to it?
The bust, well, there were 2 versions of it. One was an ordinary portrait bust. I've got one, I gave it to my daughter. The other one he enlarged with a caliper and put it on the top of St. Michael of all the Angels, which stands now on the cliff at Coventry Cathedral, as I think is quite recognisable. And
you've never had someone coming up and say, "Oh, I've seen you somewhere before."
Well, I have. They do know. And that was put up in 1958. I can't say something else, but yes, that was very, very fascinating watching him work. And you know, I always imagined if you made a bust that you started with a thing like a football, and then cut a... No, he started with a lot of little sausages and an armature which consisted simply of a post with a cross attached to it. And he laid strips like that, endlessly laid tiny strips until it became solid and smooth on the exterior.
How strange, yes. So you build it up rather than...
Built it up, never took anything off.
It's the opposite of sculpture,
Yeah,
or...
exactly. I think he died in 1959.
You said, you mentioned that you seem to have had a very lovely year with Kitty, and
Yes.
but you said it was also a very difficult time.
Well, just because I wasn't getting anywhere. At 26, I hadn't got a job. I didn't know what I was going to do. So then, it was P.W.S. Andrews who got me an interview with an executive order in the Metal Box Company, which is a company that made tin cans and seaside pails.
Which branch were you in?
I was in a thing called infant stats. And it was, you see, because people don't help you, they don't really, but Andrews really did help me. He got me this interview, and I got a job, £60 a month. Very lowly job, and absolutely no knowledge of, more or less forgotten everything.
In stats, was it?
Yes, information and statistics.
Yeah.
But I felt very much humiliated by the insignificance of the job I held. I mean, what do you do is a question I didn't welcome.
Especially when you were mixing with people of Kitty's background.
And Freddie, yeah, Matthew Smith. Anyway, then Kitty noticed an advertisement in the New Statesman. People looking for economists in the Treasury. So I applied for this job. I'd been swatting up, in the ordinary course, I'd been swatting up the national income, how to measure it, and reading a bit. But anyway, I went to an interview, which was, I found very... But it happened that I knew about some things that Robert Hall, who was the chief economic advisor of them, and I happened to know about the price of tin.
Working in the metal box company.
Yeah, absolutely. We had to know about the price of tin. Because they didn't make tin plate, but you had to know about what was going to turn into the price of tin. Anyway, I got this lowly job, and that would have been in 1956. Yes. I went into the... Epstein made the bus to me in February 1956, and I went in March to the Treasury. In a very low position, as you can imagine. And then I worked away at it. And I'm bound to say I didn't feel quite so humiliated, except on occasion. What we had to do, and what to an increasing extent I had to do, was to interpret more or less raw figures for use by the government. I mean, why it was these, and what the future would be. And there was an array of economists and statisticians from other departments who fed you with the more or less raw data and their own interpretation of it. And then I had to write a report once a month saying what had happened and what was going to happen. And then do a big forecasting exercise once every 6 months, on which the budget would be based and ministers would be briefed on this. And as time passed and other people left, I became quite an expert. I mean, how many years passed? I was promoted. And then, of course, the big change in my life, professional life, was in about 1964-5, when Well, to back up just a bit, I went, because I'd acquired all this undigested knowledge, and I went for a couple of years to the National Institute on secondment. And I wrote a lot of pieces which were published then on particular things which I acquired knowledge of, humble things, like the retail price index and unemployment and humble. And that was they were quite a hit at the time, and people referred to them and used them. And when I went back to the Treasury, it had all changed. It was the Labour government. And then I met Nicky Caldwell the first time. And that, as it turned out, was a very, very big event in my life. Anyway, I formed a close relationship with him. And I did one or two quite important, quite spectacular. I mean, they were spectacular by their nature. I don't know if you can remember a thing called the selective employment tax, but it was very important in that year, which was 1966, when I had to create the statistical system for levying the tax. It was complicated because I had to raise much more money than they needed in one way and then pay it back in a different way. And then the following year, which was devaluation, and I did all the calculations. How big the devaluation should be and what the capital should be and all that sort of thing. And then I was considered to be a sort of coming man because I'd done all these very strictly Treasury things successfully, and I had a good working knowledge of the economy, in short, and how it was measured, and what was likely to happen to it, sort of. Although I now think it was very flimsy, had a very flimsy basis in theory.
Were you interested in macro theory? I mean, were you drawing on the work of Keynes or...
Well, we thought we were, but it couldn't be used in any... It couldn't be just turned into... We had our own way of modelling the economy, which, as I say, I now think was seriously inadequate. But in principle, it was Keynesian. It was Keynesian in spirit. And so then Nicky, it was his doing. He was very persuasive and very persistent. But he persuaded me to leave. So I was then an undersecretary. It was quite a senior position. And I was very well established, and I had a very beautiful house in London. He persuaded me to come to Cambridge. I'm sorry to say, from a personal point of view, I regard that as being, by a very long way, the worst thing I've ever done.
The worst?
Worst.
Well, we'll come to that. But can you tell us more about Nicky? I mean, at some point, whether this is the right point. I met him towards the end of his life, and obviously didn't get to know him at all well. But what was he? He's a very large man.
Yes. Sideways,
anyway. not.
Well, Kid McMahon made a good joke about him. I don't know about the physiology of this, but he told me there were three types. There were ectoderms and endoderms and mesoderms. And ectoderm, the cell, Ecto made the bones and skeleton. Endo made the gut. And Meso made the nervous system, and which corresponded to Henry V, Hamlet, and Henry V. Well, Henry V, Hamlet, and Falstaff. And Nicky was the unique Falstaffian intellect who thought with his gut. And that was a very sort of good thing to say about him, because although you could always, in the very end, you could pin him down to the logic of an argument, his answers flowed from his body. And that's a property I've never known in him. I mean, he never thought before he spoke, or hesitated. He emanated. He emanated thought. And, I mean, he is the one person who has been touched with genius, I mean, in a true sense, that he had a kind of unlimited intake and output.
When you say the one person, one economist, you mean,
One economist
that you had met. Yeah.
Well, William Clock and Isaiah both emanated genius. Those are the only other two, I think, that I...
He was one of the three academics you met who were like
Well,
that.
William Clock was not an academic, he was a performing artist,
yeah.
but he was also a great scholar. Well...
So getting back to why Cambridge is such a disaster.
Oh, well, let me just say some more. He was very persuasive, and he would never give up. And he used to, he used to go to sleep, because he slept in the permanent secretary. William Armstrong was the permanent secretary, very much respected. And he used to sleep at meetings of the top Treasury officials. And he was extremely greedy. We used to go to Soho. That was when Callaghan was Chancellor. And there's a story I have about that. He used to go to Wheeler's in Soho, and he always had a particular kind of sole which had a lot of cream sauce. And he was very, very much annoyed with Callaghan because it's something to do with deprived children. He said, it's devilish. And because he was eating this creamy sole, fat, in a very greedy way, I started to kid him that he wasn't being wholly sincere. And that caused him to burst into tears, because he wanted to prove to me that he did care. And then a stream of tears came down one side of him, and out of his mouth came the creamy sauce, and he made a kind of horrible emulsion on his chin. I mean, it sort of, there was something conveys what it might have been like to be in his company. He loved laughter. It was usually at his own jokes, but not quite always. And he had his specialities. And, I mean, in economics, as well as being a very creative scholar. So, yes, well, my arrival in Cambridge,
How did he contrive a position for you at Cambridge? Or did
you couldn't resist him. And once he gets onto an appointments committee, because there were other people much better.
What appointment was it?
Director of the Department of Applied Economics.
Oh, that.
A professorial type was not a... Because you see, he wanted me not only to be head of the Department of Applied Economics, he also wanted me to be a Fellow of King's. As he was on the Appointments Committee, he knew that I was the new director before anybody else knew. So he immediately went to Edmund Leach, said, right,
What year is this? This is
1970.
same year as I was elected to King's. Right.
Anyway, he went to see the professorial quota was full. Nevertheless, Edmund immediately wrote to me a letter that arrived simultaneously with the publication of the result. So if you hang around for a bit, you'll get a fellowship at King's. Of course, entirely contrary to the letter and spirit of the quota business.
Mm.
And I wrote back saying, thank you very much, I'd love to hang around for a bit. And then the next post came 2 letters from other heads of services inviting me to go and see them. So you can see it put me in a very, I felt very awkward, and nothing of it. I had no particular wish to be a fellow of King's rather than anybody else. Anyway, that was a great embarrassment to do with that.
How was it sorted out?
It was sorted out, that's rather. Well, you see, Burke Hill, I think he was Burke, name like Burke Hill, who was the master of Peter House, asked me for the weekend. And I enjoyed it, it was good fun. But
He was master of where?
Peter House.
Peter House, yes.
And prevaricated. And then, in the end, I decided that I wasn't going to be bound out by Edmund's charitable but absolutely improper proposal, and went back to Burke and said I'd like to be a fellow of Peter House. Then he thought he didn't want me. So I can't tell you how embarrassing and horrible it all was. I've been used to the Treasury, which is an entirely hierarchical organisation. But as they're united in purpose, and all very clever people, you're never aware of any pressure or conflict, ever, with trivial exceptions. Well, I came to Cambridge supposing, as director of the department, that sort of more or less people would do what I tell them to do. But not a bit of it. I mean, all they thought of in relation to me was that I preserved their jobs. Because there was none of them had tenure.
It was on soft funding, was it?
Yes. And then the structure of it, the appointment structure of it, was very questionable because it became, they were so anxious about me, thinking that I would try to do them down. This was bursting, so that it was difficult for me to see how I could do any of my own research.
How many people were there?
About 30, I should think. And the appointments committee of the department was the committee of management, and they all went to the previous director, who was Brian Redaway, and said, can you see if Godley will use the right of the committee of management to co-opt members, to allow them to co-opt people that we elect. So Redaway put this to me in a very neutral way. He didn't ever tolerate any such thing when he was director. Well then, as the committee of management was also the appointment committee, I was sort of structurally in a very, very bad position. Because these non-tenured people were fully operational and very highly motivated members of the appointments committee, to a short tenured Absolutely daft.
Daft.
I went and complained to the General Board, and they didn't do anything about it. Anyway, I was very unpopular, for no reason, I mean that I could see. I wished them well. But there was a very uncomfortable feeling about it. And there were also, which I hadn't known, there were very difficult members of the assistant staff who were real troublemakers.
Assistant staff?
Yeah.
Mm.
Computing people and that sort of thing,
Mm.
who were real troublemakers. So I was unhappy, just like that. And
Very soon wished you hadn't made the move.
yes, I very nearly resigned on the spot. Very, very nearly. I thought it's too feeble to do that. But however, and then I wasn't properly trained as an economist, as people would recognise it. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to pass part one, because I only had my Treasury experience. But that I did have, and I had a lot of things to write about. I mean, for instance, I was special advisor to the parliamentary committee on dealing with public expenditure, which I knew a great deal about. I spent 3 years special. I mean, I'm not saying I was sort of wholly incompetent. There was a lot of policy and material that I knew a great deal about. And I also knew that the economy was very sort of badly covered in the public discussion. And I knew more than any of the journalists at that time. So I thought, well, what I shall start doing is to do my Treasury work in the Department of Applied Economics. And that was very successful, at least in the sense that it got a lot of coverage in the newspapers. And Francis Cripps, who I think, if Calder was a genius, Francis Cripps was and is the actual sort of cleverest economist I've known. And he left his job in the faculty. He had a tenured post and came and worked untenured as an ordinary economist in the Department of Economics. And then we started a thing together called the Cambridge Economic Policy Group, which produced reports and bulletins done in the Cambridge Economic Policy Group, which were evaluations of the economic situation and prospect. To begin with a special reference to public expenditure and public finance, which to begin with was, I think I can say, was very successful, at least reasonably successful. We did, but we were rather in the limelight. I mean, it got a lot of coverage in the press, and Times in particular, and in the Financial Times. I was very friendly with the main economic journalists at that time. And Francis built a model, an elaborate model of the British economy, which we used to make projections. We got a nice big grant from the SSRC as it was then. We certainly did get 1 or 3 of the big turning points right. 1974, inflation 1975, and the collapse of the economy after 79-80. We were unpopular, I would say, with almost everybody. Very pessimistic about the medium-term future, and very seriously entertained the possibility of protection as an economic strategy, which of course is very unpopular with economists. Anyway then, we had what? I suppose I had a staff of about 8. So we also wrote pieces about regional policy and about world. Francis also built a world model, very ingenious, which we're just beginning to use. And then came catastrophe, because the SSRC turned us down when it came to renewing our big grant. There was a very serious flaw in that procedure, which is that they didn't consult us. They didn't pay a site visit. So there was no possibility, they didn't put any adverse proposition.
They wouldn't do that now, I don't think. When they close things, they make great precautions for legal entanglement, so you were just unfortunate at the time.
Well, this is quite a good story about Francis Cripps, as to what a clever man he was. When I went back to the Treasury for a year, 1975, and I wanted to get a piece of computing done to prove something to those, a piece of modelling work to be done, computerised. So I went to Francis with the equations, and I just see him. He went back into his room with his cigarette and puffed. He came out with a computer program, and he put it in, and out came the answer in 4 seconds. So as the subject was terribly secret, I didn't actually, although he knew perfectly well what it was, but I didn't say anything about it. I just asked him to solve the model. So I went back to the Treasury with this program, and after I took it, they had a sort of enormous computer in the attic, and I gave it in to them, and 4 or 5 days later they hadn't produced the answer. So I went up to them and said, what's going on? Why didn't you produce the answer? We can't understand it. I said, what do you mean you can't understand? We can't understand how it works. So I said, put it into the computer and get the answer. And they put it in and the answer came out. And they were never able to understand. Well, I'm advised that Gordon told them that that our computing system was antiquated and very slow and out of date and not respectable. It was absolutely the most brilliant thing you can imagine in reality. And the other thing, of course, was that not one of the consortium had ever actually built a model. There were people, there were econometricians, different sort of people. So, and there was no recourse, no substantial recourse. And that really was a catastrophe, because it meant that the group was broken up. Not to mention the fact that we were very publicly humiliated by the whole thing. And Francis left and went to Thailand, and virtually never, and the whole thing, but they all got good jobs. They weren't tons.
What date was this?
It was 1982. See, Francis was so clever. I never learnt to touch a computer. So I had to start doing modelling on my own. And I had 3 years. I was still director of the department, on a very much reduced scale. And that's another whole story about that. But I started to learn modelling, taught myself modelling. And I gradually, I think I can, well, of a certain kind of motley, I became reasonably expert. Now, in the 1978, well, it's really 1974, I started on a line of research into macroeconomic theory. I had an insight. I had sort of Damascene insight about how the economy as a whole was put together. And I started to write about it in 1978. And then it was aside from the economy watching activities. And then started to write it up, tried to write it up, and Frank offered me I've got the books, it's just a book called Macroeconomics, which is supposed to be a guide to macroeconomics, which, aided by the large fees it brought, I took on. And I started to write it up on campus. And Francis joined in with me, and we published this book. And it came on stream just about the time of the debacle with
The debacle with the...
with the SRC.
Yes, SRC.
And it came out, I think, in 1983, it was published. But only about 6 people thought that it was the work of genius that I thought it was. But the point was really that it was not completely, anywhere near completely thought out, the model deployed in this book. But I then had I was not deterred in my belief in the fundamental model and fundamental idea. But from 1983, I then had a very fruitful year in Denmark, and soon after I came back from Denmark, I retired. Oh, I was coming to retirement, and I went to the States, where I was very fortunate in landing a job which was well paid, which had no duties, no teaching. And I continued.
Where was that?
At Bard. They have an economics institute there. But I continued doggedly with these 2 aspects of my work. One was writing about whatever economy I was in, and I became familiar with the United States economy, and started writing pieces which, strategic pieces about the American economy, which my employers liked. But simultaneously, I was evolving a new version of the book, substantial new version of it, and making all the models myself. Well, that was incredibly engrossing. The other thing which I did, which may shock you, was I started to really understand the sort of economics that most people teach very late in the day. And in that I was very much assisted by a man who may not have heard of, called Anwar Sheikh, who is a professor at the New School. And we used to have brainstorming sessions on the neoclassical synthesis, which went on for hours and hours and days and weeks and weeks. And in the end, I came to what I now believe to be a proper understanding of the system of ideas that had been opposed to, and of course Calder and Co. had always been opposed to. But I came to my own version of how to oppose it. I mean, how to set it out properly, which in a sense was also a way of opposing it. So these two things came on simultaneously, a positive statement and a negative statement. And I started writing up the positive statement in bits and pieces, which got published. And then I had the great good fortune to, well, that happened in an amusing way. I had a letter from Ottawa, from a man called Macfarlane, and he wrote me an email saying, "We are 4 full professors and we cannot understand equation X in your paper on such and such." So I wrote back saying, "You can't understand it because it has a very bad mistake in it." And so he came to see me, and we got on very well. And he agreed to co-author the book I was then sort of more or less halfway through. Very deeply sympathetic, and a good scholar, and a good monetary economist, and a very nice man. And that's what I've been doing ever since. Except, you see, I've got the book. The book came out just over a year ago. Godley and Lavoie, called Monetary Economics.
King's, when I came to it, was
Yes.
full of economists, and Edmund used to complain about having too many economists.
Yes.
Obviously, most formidable, apart from Nicky, was, although very old, was Richard Kahn.
Yes.
What was he like?
Well, I'm afraid I couldn't get on with him in any real sense. See, the other, well, that's all a great story in itself, is how it came about that the economists most closely associated with Keynes, of whom Calder was not one, you know. But there were Joan Robinson and Richard Kahn and Thruffer, and in an indirect sense me.
And Passionetti? No.
Well, Passionetti is a junior person.
Yeah.
But Nicky became part of it. Well, I don't know that he was much personally involved with Keynes, but there was a whole, and Stone, of course. Underrated man, in my opinion.
Richard Stone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Underrated by his Cambridge colleagues. But there were all these very powerful, genuinely very powerful minded people who were the direct descendants of Keynes. But they were impossible, individually and collectively. They were vain. They didn't sponsor other people's work. They were quarrelsome. They wanted to be the one, and they left no legacy. There was no, and they didn't leave a coherent body of work. This is a very important part of my own story, because I knew a lot of Calder's ideas. But you see, there's no Caldorian textbook. There's no synthesis, there's no post-Keynesian synthesis, which tells you from beginning to end what the post-Keynesian view is as to how the economic system works. It's all in bits and pieces with brilliant insights. Well, to come back to your actual question, I found Richard Codd very difficult to talk to, and of course Joan Robinson too. Very opinionated.
Did they listen? Not really.
Not really.
I only met Joan Robinson once. She didn't really. She seemed to be interested in what she was talking about.
Yeah. Well, that's all a great tragedy. They were all very gifted. I'm not saying they weren't. But they weren't people to help you along the road. They wanted all of them to be the one. But they didn't do the thing which I'm complaining of, which is to produce a coherent statement of how the whole economy works. Of course, another important figure there is Koletsky, who was not, who thought most, he thought for himself and made it very clear that.
Was he in Cambridge?
Well, he was off and on in Cambridge. I don't know how much he was, but he was before my time. So I'm in great danger of making hostages to fortune. But if I'm to speak honestly, I mean, there's no point in speaking any other way. I believe myself, with Macfarlane, to have made a statement of the alternative macroeconomics, which is enough, at least, for other people to build in and to rehabilitate the, I don't know whether to call it the true, because I don't owe much to Keynes, not Keynes himself, but there is another body, there is another way of thinking about the economy other than the very influential standard neoclassical macroeconomics. American, what I meant to say, Modigliani, Samuelson, Patinkin, for a good start. Their version of it. But I mean, it is an amazing fact that there are two paradigms deeply hostile to one another. And the post-Keynesian one has been largely routed for the time being by both with regard to teaching, appointments, publications, and the way people think. But which there have been pockets of resistance in lots of places, but they're not influenced. They've been written out of the literature. And what I believe myself to have done is to rehabilitate that in a way that none of those people would actually do. Well, they didn't do it, and I don't think they would do it now. But that's what I've done.
And what is the implication? Can you spell it out again?
Well, it is an altogether different way of thinking. But it has got political, I mean, I suppose the main political implication is that the market is king. I mean, the less the government does, and the more we allow the market to function freely, whatever that may mean, that is the orthodoxy.
Can I just come back to the other side of, or part of the side of your life in Cambridge, which we haven't talked about, which is King's?
Yes.
And you were elected professorial fellow after that difficult beginning. And one or two people who we both knew, and it would be interesting to have your views on. The first was one you mentioned, the provost at the time, Edmund Leach. How did you get on with Edmund?
I loved him, and I got on extremely well with him. What more can I say? He was a slightly, well, he was an erratic figure. He could be bad-tempered and tyrannical. But I didn't care about that. To me, he was always generous and courteous and funny and loving. That's the thing.
Did you know Celia at all?
I did. I knew them as a couple as well. And she was a very attractive compliment to him.
Did you think he was an original thinker? Or perhaps it was outside your field?
Entirely, it was right outside my field. But I didn't entirely, I suppose I should say, trust his view. So far as I could identify. I mean, I'm speaking as such an amateur. My knowledge is so trivial. But I didn't, you know, this tremendous emphasis on cooking and eating, and I couldn't. I mean, there have been anthropological books. I don't know whether they're kosher, whether you like them or not, which is really, I mean, like Patterns of Culture. There's a book that really changed my life.
Did it?
Well, because I was locked into logical positivism. And I thought that life could have a meaning apart from chopping up meanings, whether we were using language the right way. I mean, and there really were interesting things to learn about other people, which couldn't be chopped up in the logical status of propositions. So that did have a great, and lots of, I mean, I've read things as a pastime, but I was never quite convinced by Edmund's views.
Another Kingsman who you mentioned was a close friend and professor, the Edward VII Professor of English Literature, Frank Kermode.
My dear friend, yes.
Tell me something about Frank.
Well, I played squash with him every week for about 20 years.
Better way of getting to know somebody.
Exactly. In fact, the piece I wrote about him in that little volume, I just called it The Opponent. And he was quite a tough opponent. He's more athletic than you might suppose. I mean, I'm not an athlete, but he often beat me, and he was very competitive. And I had a row with him once, because I had to lie down. I mean, I was out of shape, and I lay down. I said, I give you the game, but I've got to lie down. And then when we started again, and I won the next 4 points, and I said, all right, but he was really cross. It's the only time I've seen him really angry. Because I won by stealth. But he minded. He liked to win. I mean, although he was so, he's so modest in every way, but he liked to win. Of course, that made him a good opponent.
As a scholar?
Well, the wonderful thing about him is that he always knew everything. He never made me feel small for not knowing as much as he did. And yet I suppose, quarter to half of the time, we talk about literature or music, which he also knows a lot. He knows a lot about everything. It's very good company, very sweet-tempered.
But you were saying rather surprisingly unsure of himself.
Amazingly, what would you tell the story about
Yes.
Logan? Yes. Well, that's a very good example of how low esteem he holds himself. It was when I was on the board of directors at Covent Garden, had access to the Royal Box. I asked him to come to dinner and see one of the big Wagner operas. And I was going to drive him and the party down to the opera house. And when it was getting almost too late, he hadn't come. I rang him up, said, "Where are you?" And it turned out that what had happened was he'd come to my house, knocked on the door, not immediately received an answer, and assumed that we'd gone without him. Absolutely extraordinary. Amazing that we would have done such a thing. So we got him, had to speed all the way there, got there out of breath, but we got there all together. Had a good evening.
You mentioned music, which came up a lot at the beginning. I mean, you came to a college which is quite famous for its music.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that side of King's?
Not really, because I wasn't part of it. I always saw myself as a player. So apart from playing 2 or 3 concerts with David Wilcox, in his, I could say his dying years, just before he left, which I enjoyed very much, particularly a performance of the Brahms Requiem. It had a marvellous oboe part in it. Mind you, he was a difficult man. He was a difficult man to conduct, to follow.
Was he?
Well, he was one of those people, a circular beat, that you couldn't find the downbeat as you were watching. You know, I asked Stephen Cleobury to invite me to play. It's the last time I played it all seriously. And I asked him, not that I could play in a concert, but you know, there's one weekend when the scholars are away, and instead of evensong, they have a little cantata concert. And I asked him if I could play a solo part in a Bach cantata. And for the whole term in the United States, I practiced it. Every single day I practiced. I almost got up to a point, something I needn't be ashamed of. That's about the last. But he is another man who is so modest in his manner.
Yes.
You wouldn't guess, because he has a wonderful beat. And he knew how to test for the balance, and a wonderfully efficient performer with a choir and orchestra.
Yes, indeed. Coming back to King's, we've really only talked about Frank and Edmund. Were there any other people you were close to?
Adrian Wood has been my real friend.
He was an economics research fellow in the
Yes.
70s, wasn't he?
That's right, and he's an extremely clever man, and the work he did as a PhD student is still alive and part of the literature, and is quoted as a separate source in my book. And my other friends, Christopher Prendergast is a close friend of mine. But we we chatter about the stock market, but he doesn't have any knowledge of. Those are the main people.
You were saying I was mentioning that I was hoping to write something about Cambridge, and you said
Oh, yes.
that there was a coda.
Oh, I said, well, I meant it had a, well, that might be difficult to understand, but it had a character. I'm not sure I didn't say a smell, or
Yes.
an
Aura.
aura. It has a feeler about it,
Hmm.
which is unlike any other thing, and very unlike Oxford, of course,
Hmm.
and very much less friendly. So I found it a sort of definitely unfriendly atmosphere.
Did you?
People will walk past you without looking at you.
Hmm. Kitty was saying the same thing
Yes.
just now.
We both felt it very much.
Hmm.
I mean, I think more even for her, because, you know, Kitty's not academic at all, and didn't have any formal education after a certain age, but she's extremely well read, and very interesting. She's very interesting about what she reads, but she couldn't talk to anyone in Cambridge. It's a cast of mind that people wouldn't recognise.
So you didn't have a real sense of fellowship at King's?
No. I can't say that. We had a little bit of, towards the beginning of the time I was there was a little group of people who were merry together. Charles Hope and Caroline Elam and Adrian. And there was a historian, Martin Lyons.
Oh yes, I knew Martin.
He
was elected at the same time as I was.
We were a merry group.
Tony Judd? No, he was...
He was not part of that group, of course.
At the same time.
Yeah.
And John Donne?
John Donne I got to know much later. And he's been a very dear friend for the last 8-9 years. So long.
Having looked at economic and other trends over the last 30-40 years, do you think we are doomed?
Doomed?
Yes. I mean, that's to say population, ecology, etc., etc.
Yes. Well, I certainly think, and that's quite exactly consistent with what I've said, I certainly don't think it will happen all by itself. The market forces are not going to solve the problem. No, absolutely. Some great process of whether it happens naturally or unnaturally, but some active, we'll call it collaboration, but the world's problems, which are serious, will not be solved by market forces alone, or even principally by them. Something else has to be done. And it's a very good question to ask. I mean, what's going on now? What seems like a major, well, it is a relatively major crisis, but it has come about because of deregulation. The banking and financial systems have been deregulated. There used to be controls on all these things. Thatcher and Lawson. And it's a thing which people don't remember or realise. But the whole financial system was deregulated in the 80s. And if it hadn't been, I don't think we'd be in this mess we're in now. Because they're only moving in, the central banks are only moving in very reluctantly. And in my opinion, haven't moved in enough yet to see us through.
The other huge question is the shift of economic and political power eastwards,
Yes.
towards China and Japan and so on. But
I don't think it's hit the people, it hasn't really got into people's consciousness yet.
no,
And the decline of America,
exactly. I mean,
particularly.
a double process, one going down and one going up.
Yeah. Quite fast.
Very fast. I mean, each estimate of the time at which the Chinese economy will catch up with America gets shorter and shorter. It used to be 2050 or 2060. Now it's within a generation or less. And having been to China a lot recently, I've seen what's happening. It's just out of this world. Did you spend any time outside Europe and America?
I haven't. I very much regret it now. But I haven't. And I have most of my professional, or a lot of them, allies are in South America.
Sounds like your grandfather who ran India from Whitehall. You sound a bit like the famous remark attributed to Sir James Fraser when asked if he'd ever met any of the natives on Trinity High Table, and fearing loss of face he said, "God forbid." So,
Give me that book. I want to show you.
which one is it?
Well, the one right at the end,
This
called
one?
The India Office. Yes. I want to show you what he looked like in his prime.
The India Office. This is back to your grandfather.
Yeah.
Is that a portrait of him?
It's a photograph of him.
So we'll get him
Ah,
a very nice picture of him.
isn't it it's a good face, isn't it? Strong, humorous.
And in many ways one of the most influential people in your lives. In your life.
Well, I think of him every day.
Hmm.
What he would have said about it.
Well, I think that's a very nice note to end on. So thank you very much indeed, Wynne. That was lovely.